Have you ever imagined being in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the biting cold, and suddenly a wild cub appears before you, begging for help? What if this little creature wasn't just another lost animal, but a survivor of something terrible, a heartbreaking story waiting to be told? Today, you will experience an unbelievable rescue, a moment where nature and destiny intersected in a way that no one could have predicted. In the white expanse of Alaska, where ice swallows the horizon and every day is a battle for survival, a lonely man found something that changed his life forever. A small shadow appeared in the snow, fragile, trembling, desperate. A bear cub, alone, lost, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. But what was this little guy doing there, completely vulnerable? Where was your mother? The temperature plummeted quickly. The wind howled as if the earth itself was crying, and that cub could barely move. His fur, once thick and protective, was now covered in ice. His paws trembled, and each step felt like a superhuman effort. He was on the edge. If no one helped him, he wouldn't see the dawn. But there was someone there, and that person would need to make an impossible decision. It was at that moment that Mike, an explorer accustomed to the solitude of the mountains, came across this harrowing scene. The wildlife code said that you should not intervene, that the animals should follow their natural course. But what if this rule was wrong? What if, this time, fate had placed that puppy there for a reason? As Mike watched the little creature in the snow, something inside him changed. The cub's eyes, shining in the dim moonlight, didn't just ask for warmth. They asked for something deeper, hope, as if he knew that this man was his only chance to survive. But what to do? Getting closer meant taking risks. A puppy is never alone for long. What if the mother was nearby? She could attack. But if he waited a few more minutes, that little heart that was beating fast and desperately might just stop. The dilemma was cruel. Time was against them. Mike took a deep breath. His fingers were already numb from the cold, and his mind was fighting the logic imposed by years of survival. But at that moment, in front of that desperate look, he realized something. Sometimes life doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes we simply need to take action. And that's exactly what he did. Mike took a deep breath and took a step forward. The cub cowered, hesitantly, but did not run away. He had no strength. Her little lungs heaved in the freezing air. Her eyes pleaded silently. It wasn't fear he conveyed. It was something even deeper. Despair. Mike slowly knelt, extending his gloved hand. The cub didn't back down. On the contrary, he tried to take a step, but his paws failed, sinking into the snow. It was at that moment that Mike knew he couldn't leave him there. Breaking the rules of nature could be costly, but ignoring that little being would cost even more. Gently, he wrapped the cub in his coat, feeling the cold body contract against the sudden heat. The little one's heart was beating fast against his chest. Each beat was a reminder that there was still time, but not much. The blizzard increased, covering the trail of footprints in the snow. The wind howled, as if nature itself was watching that moment. Mike picked up his pace. He knew he needed to act quickly, but a question kept ringing in his mind. Why was this puppy alone? Where was your mother? What would you do in Mike's place? Would he have taken the risk to save the cub, or would he have followed the rules and let nature take its course? I want to know your opinion in the comments. Stories like this make us reflect on our own choices and the impact we have on the world. So, take advantage and leave a like if this story has already touched you in some way, because each like helps this video reach more people and spread this message of compassion. And of course, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the perfect time. Here you will find real, emotional, and inspiring stories about animals in extremely dangerous situations. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey, because what happens next will surprise you. Mike didn't know it yet, but that rescue was about to turn into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The wind cut like sharp blades across the endless white Alaskan wilderness. The icy expanse stretched out in all directions, with nothing but snow and silence. But that day, something broke this monotony. In the middle of the white expanse, something small, something alive, trembled against the relentless cold. A bear cub. Mickey had already seen a lot in her life. He grew up among the Inuit, learning from an early age that nature has no mercy on the weak. In the far north, survival was a daily battle, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. He understood the rules. He knew that wildlife followed its own course, and that interfering was not always the best course. But at that moment, upon seeing that little defenseless being struggling to take even a step, something inside him stirred. The cub was alone, and that in itself was a bad sign. Grizzly bears don't abandon their cubs for no reason. Or rather, they don't abandon them at all. If a calf was alone in that freezing landscape, two things could have happened. Either its mother rejected it, which was rare, or something much worse had happened. The cold was relentless, and Mickey knew that the puppy wouldn't last long. His instincts screamed to move on, to ignore that scene and remember that nature has its own laws. But there was something in the little bear's eyes, something that prevented him from simply turning around and continuing on his way. A look of despair, of need, of absolute surrender. Mickey slowly crouched down, the snowflakes falling heavy on her fur and leather-covered skin. His body was already accustomed to those extreme temperatures, but the cub wasn't so lucky. His paws trembled, his breathing was short and ragged, and every movement felt like a superhuman effort. He was already on the verge of exhaustion. Mickey knew that if she wanted to do something, she would have to act quickly. The cold was increasing, visibility decreasing. Blizzards like this could become fatal in a matter of minutes. And if he didn't make a decision soon, that little life before him would simply disappear, swallowed up by the ice. He took off his gloves slowly, feeling the cold penetrate his skin almost immediately. The cub took a small step back, hesitant. It was instinctive, an automatic reaction, but he didn't run away. That was what bothered Mickey the most. Any wild animal under normal conditions would have run, but not that puppy. He just stood there, watching, as if he knew that this human before him was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, Mickey removed the caribou skin she wore to keep warm and, carefully, advanced a little further. The cub didn't react. It just remained motionless, its small body twitching with each gust of wind. When Mickey finally touched the skin to its back, the little bear didn't move, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't leave him there. He wrapped his skin around the baby, pulling it gently against his chest. The small body was absurdly cold. The heart was racing with fear and exhaustion. Mickey pressed the cub against her, trying to share some warmth. The way back to his cabin seemed longer than before. The wind increased, pushing him back, each step requiring greater effort. He hugged the cub against his body, protecting him as best he could from the storm. When he finally saw the cabin, he felt momentary relief, but he couldn't afford to relax. As soon as he entered, closing the door behind him, he hurried to light the fire. The heat slowly spread throughout the room, and Mickey knelt in front of the flame, still holding the calf wrapped in the caribou skin. The little bear was motionless. His chest rose and fell slowly, his breathing shallow. Mickey reached out and gently touched his head. The cub was conscious, but so exhausted that it didn't even react. It was only then that Mickey noticed something even stranger. He took a closer look at the puppy and noticed small dark spots on its soft white fur. Dried blood. His heart sped up. That meant one thing: something had happened to her mother. The question now was not just, why was he alone? But what had happened for him to end up like this? And perhaps even more important, had the danger really passed? What do you think happened to this cub's mother? Was there still something or someone out there waiting to claim the little survivor? Leave your guess in the comments. This story is far from over, and I want to know what you would do in this situation. If this story has already touched you in some way, if you are feeling the same tension as me when telling this journey, then leave a like, because this helps the channel grow and spread these incredible stories to more people. And if you haven't signed up yet, now is the perfect time. Here you will find heartwarming stories of animal rescues, moments of survival, and unexpected connections between humans and wildlife. Turn on the notification bell, Because what happens next is even more surprising. Mickey thought she had only saved one cub, but that night, he would discover that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The night in Alaska was a thick veil of silence and darkness. The snow fell in heavy flakes and the wind howled, as if it carried with it the secrets of the wild. Inside the isolated wooden hut, Mickey huddled under the furs that protected him from the biting cold, trying to ignore the storm raging outside. But in the midst of that freezing chaos, a different sound cut through the noise of the wind. A faint, almost imperceptible noise that shouldn't be there. Mickey frowned, slowly standing up. It wasn't the sound of the snow piling up, nor the creaking of the cabin's aged wood. It was something more. Alive. A brittle sound like a choked lament, an almost inaudible plea. His keen instinct told him something was wrong. Grabbing a flashlight and covering himself with thick skin, he pushed open the door to face the biting cold. Outside, the darkness was absolute, only broken by the pale reflection of the moon on the accumulating snow. The wind was blowing gusts of ice, and every step was a challenge against the force of the storm. Mickey narrowed her eyes, trying to identify the source of the sound. He turned the flashlight from side to side, illuminating only the silent, white expanse. Then something small moved at the edge of the beam of light. His heart skipped a beat. There, huddled against nothingness, was an Arctic fox cub. Too small to be alone, too fragile to survive that merciless night. His white fur was camouflaged in the snow, but his eyes shone, big and scared. He was shaking violently, his thin paws half buried in the ice, as if his body no longer had the strength to move. Mickey stopped watching. Something was wrong. Wild cubs, no matter how small, instinctively fled from human presence. But not that one. He just stood there, staring at him. There was no fear in his eyes, just silent desperation, as if she knew somehow that this man was her only chance. Mickey felt a knot form in her chest. He knew he shouldn't intervene. The wildlife code was clear. Interfering with the natural balance could be dangerous. But there was something about him, something about that scene that defied all logic. How had that little fox gotten there? Where was your mother? Why was he so quiet, so weak? The wind blew stronger, making the fox's small body shrink even more. Mickey's instinct fought against common sense. He couldn't just ignore it. That cub wouldn't survive for long. Slowly bending down, he held out his hand, trying not to startle him. The cub blinked, hesitated for a moment, and then tried to take a step. But his paws failed, and he fell sideways into the soft snow. That was enough for Mickey to make her decision. Carefully, he took the small animal in his hands. The cub shivered, its body stiff from the cold. His heart was beating too fast, an accelerated rhythm of pure fear and exhaustion. Mickey wrapped him inside the skin she wore, bringing him close to her chest. The puppy didn't survive. He simply accepted. The way back to the cabin was difficult. The storm was getting worse, and the snow was piling up, making every step a challenge. But Mickey held the little being firmly, protecting him from the merciless wind. As soon as she was through the door of her hut and locked out the cold, Mickey hurried to rekindle the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls, bringing a bit of warmth to the frigid environment. Carefully, he opened the skin and looked at the cub, who was now resting on the table. The little one was shaking. His eyes were half open. His breathing was short and irregular. He was frozen. Mickey knew she needed to act quickly. He pulled out another dry skin, wrapping the little fox like a cocoon. He took a soft cloth and began to lightly rub his paws, trying to restore circulation. Little by little, the cub seemed to relax, his breathing slowing down a little. But then, Mickey noticed something. There were small specks of dried blood on the fox's white fur. His chest tightened. He gently turned the cub over, analyzing every part of its body. The blood didn't appear to be his. It was as if he had leaned against something, or someone. Mickey felt a wave of worry rise within him. This meant that something had happened, something that had left him alone in the middle of that storm. And the only logical explanation was that his mother wasn't there anymore. The question that was playing in Mickey's mind now was even more disturbing. What had happened to her? The night advanced slowly. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with a gentle warmth. Mickey watched the little fox, who was now sleeping curled up in the soft fur. She looked so vulnerable, so out of place in this brutal world. He didn't know what he would do with her. Should I release her as soon as she was better? Take care of her until she had the strength to go on her own? His instinct told him that that puppy wasn't there by chance. Something bigger was happening, something he didn't yet understand. But before he could make any decisions, a sound outside made his blood run cold. A howl, low, long, carried by the wind like a distant lament. Mickey stood still, her heart hammering against her chest. It wasn't the howl of a wolf, it was something deeper, something sadder. It was a calling. Someone, or something, was looking for that puppy. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think is happening? Who or what is out there? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if this story has already made you feel connected to this little fox, write strength in the comments, because this journey is far from over. And if you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Turn on the notification bell because what happens next will shake you even more. This story still has a lot to reveal, and the danger is just beginning. The wind was blowing with a piercing force, as if nature itself was testing the limits of everything that still resisted in that white immensity. The wooden cabin creaked from the force of the storm, and each gust of wind seemed to bring a new challenge. Inside that small refuge, Mickey remained sitting in front of the fire, his gaze fixed on the small Arctic fox sleeping on a thick fur, still shivering slightly. He felt the heat of the fire on his skin, but it didn't calm him. His body was there, but his mind wandered in a whirlwind of uncertainty. He knew he had crossed an invisible line by bringing that puppy into his home. The most basic rule of wildlife was clear: do not interfere. Let nature take its course. Wild animals are not like dogs or cats. They belong to the earth, the ice, the wind. They learn to survive on their own unless something stops them. And that was exactly what disturbed him. Something had stopped that cub from continuing its journey. Something had taken his mother. And now he was here, left to an uncertain fate. Mickey knew she should release him as soon as the storm passed. It was the most logical choice, the only sensible choice. But at the same time, I felt a tightness in my chest when I thought about it. The little one could barely move. He was weak, disoriented, and even after being warmed by the fire and protected from the wind, his breathing was still irregular. His body had suffered, and the cruel doubt settled in Mickey's mind. Would he have the strength to survive out there? He ran his hands over his face, frustrated. The last thing he wanted was to get involved. I had seen cases like this before. Orphaned puppies who seemed defenseless at first, but who, as they grew, lost any bond of trust and became distant, skittish creatures of the forest. As it should be, as it needed to be. Nature was not made for artificial comforts, but there was something different here. As much as he tried to convince himself that that puppy was just another animal among so many, he couldn't ignore what his instincts were screaming. He remembered the look of the fox outside, in the darkness of the storm. The look of a being who knew he had no one else, that he understood in some way that his survival depended on what would happen at that moment. That was what made Mickey hesitate, because in that look there wasn't just instinct. There was something deeper, something he couldn't explain. He looked again at the fox, who was breathing slowly, exhausted. Dried blood was still on her white fur, a grim reminder that she had been through something terrible before she was found. And then, the wind outside brought back that sound. The howl. Mickey froze. It was low, carried by the wind, but now it seemed closer. He slowly got up, going to the window covered in a layer of thin ice. The blizzard made everything difficult to see, but for a moment he had the sensation of seeing a distant shadow, motionless, as if watching the cabin. His heart hammered in his chest. It wasn't a wolf. He knew the howls of wolves. This was different. It was longer, almost like a call, as if something was looking for someone. He felt a shiver run up his spine. Would it be possible? Mickey turned to the cub, He was still sleeping, oblivious to what was happening outside. But what if that was a response to his mother's call? What if somehow she was still alive, looking for him? His instinct told him something was wrong. Logic dictated that he shouldn't interfere any more than he already had. But then he thought about what would have happened if he hadn't gone out that night. If he hadn't heard that small sound almost drowned out by the storm. That fox would already be dead. And now he had to decide if he would give her another chance, or if he would just close his eyes to it. His fingers touched the wood of the table, his thoughts as heavy as the accumulated snow outside. He looked at the cub again, and then let out a long sigh. The decision had already been made, even if he still tried to fight it. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you do in this situation? Would they have let the fox follow its fate, or would they have tried to protect it? Write the word decision in the comments, because that's exactly what Mickey needs to do right now. And if this story has already touched your heart, leave a like, because every like helps this video reach more people and spread this message of compassion and survival. And if you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications, because what happens next is something no one expected. Mickey stood there, his breath mixing with the warm air rising from the fireplace, his eyes fixed on the little being sleeping on the caribou skin. The decision had already been made, even if his mind was still trying to tell him no. There was something bigger going on here, something he couldn't ignore. The call outside, the dried blood on the fox's white fur, the desperate look that begged for help without making a single sound. None of this was a coincidence. He slowly bent down, feeling the heat of the fire warm his face as he reached out towards the cub. Its rough, calloused skin contrasted with the delicacy of the small creature, which shivered slightly when it felt the touch, but did not move away. The small paws moved hesitantly, and then, with an almost painful effort, the fox placed its head on Mickey's palm. That was enough to make something inside him snap. Mickey felt a tightness in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just a wild animal seeking warmth. It wasn't instinct, it wasn't pure and simple survival. It was deeper than that. That puppy was giving his trust to him, accepting his presence, placing his last hope in that unknown human. The storm raged outside, shaking the cabin's wooden structure, but inside that small space, time seemed to stand still. Mickey lightly ran her fingers through the fox's fur, feeling the fine, icy texture of the strands. She was still shaking, but not from fear. It was pure tiredness. His small body was exhausted. His fight against death had already passed its limits. For a moment, Mickey thought about how different that scene would have been if he hadn't heard that sound in the storm. He wouldn't have left. I wouldn't have found the puppy. The next day, he would only have seen a small figure buried in the snow, another victim of Alaska's cruel winter. But now, here she was, alive, fragile, trusting him. He took a piece of dried meat, chewed it a little to soften it, and offered it to the cub. At first, he just looked, showing no interest. But after a few seconds, the smell of the food seemed to wake him up. Slowly, as if moving a mountain, the cub raised its head, opened its mouth, and accepted the piece of meat. It was a small gesture, but for Mickey, it was a confirmation. That fox wanted to live. The wind outside howled again, and Mickey slowly got up, going to the door. He needed to see. He needed to be sure that what he had heard before was real. He opened a small crack and looked at the white immensity. Nothing. The storm covered any trace of what might have been there before. No shadow, no movement, no sign that anything still roamed the cold. But he felt it. That story wasn't over yet. Mickey went back inside, closing the door carefully, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. With each passing minute, certainty grew within him. Something brought that puppy there. Something made him push through the cold, weather the storm, reach him. And now, whatever was out there, whatever had been left behind, was still waiting. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think Mickey should do next? Comment courage if he believes he should investigate what happened. And if this story has already touched you, leave a like so that more people can follow this unbelievable rescue. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because what lies ahead is something no one could predict. The night passed slowly. The storm that once roared with incessant fury lost its strength until it turned into a deep, almost suffocating silence. The wind still whistled through the cracks in Mickey's hut, but now it seemed distant, like an echo of something that had already passed. The fire in the fireplace dwindled to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The fox cub slept, curled up on the soft fur Mickey had laid out for him. His body still trembled from time to time, as if his mind was still trapped in the cruel cold of the storm he had faced. But for the first time, he seemed safe. Mickey watched in silence. He didn't sleep a wink during the night. He didn't make it. Something about that situation bothered him deeply. The call he had heard the night before still echoed in his mind. He knew it wasn't imagination. But who or what would be out there in the middle of a brutal blizzard like that? When the first rays of light appeared on the horizon, dyeing the gray sky with pale shades of blue and orange, Mickey decided she needed answers. Donning his thickest clothes and covering his face against the cold, he stood up grabbing his shotgun. Not because he wanted to use it, but because he knew the forest was unforgiving to those who ventured out unprepared. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the puppy, who was now sleeping more peacefully. He opened the door and was immediately hit by the freezing air. The storm had swept across the landscape, covering everything in a layer of fresh, untouched snow. But not completely. There were tracks. Mickey bent down, examining the ground. Small, irregular footprints. The puppy. He had come from somewhere before collapsing in the snow, and then, a few meters away, another set of footprints much larger. Mickey's chest tightened. He recognized that. They were the markings of an adult fox, and they were stained. Blood. He felt a knot form in his stomach. With careful steps, he began to follow the tracks, crossing the thick snow that crunched under his weight. Each footprint seemed to tell a story, and he feared reaching the end of it. The signs were clear. The cub had followed its mother, or what was left of her, until it could no longer continue. The path took Mickey beyond the nearby trees, where the forest became denser. The morning sun reflected off the untouched snow, creating an almost blinding glow. And then, he saw it. He stopped abruptly. His heart was pounding against his chest. There, partially covered by snow, was the motionless body of an adult fox. His once white fur was now dirty, caked with ice and dried blood. Mickey swallowed. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the scene before him. He knew what that meant. The cub wasn't just cold, he was in mourning. His only bond with the world, his only protection, was there, lifeless. And yet, he refused to accept it. With a mixture of regret and caution, Mickey took a few steps forward. When he got close enough, he saw something that made his chest tighten even more. Small footprints around the body. The cub had been there. He had smelled the snow, probably nudged the body with his nose, tried to wake her up somehow. He didn't understand that his mother wouldn't come back. Mickey knelt down, her gaze sweeping over the adult fox's body. There were no signs of a struggle, no visible bite marks or wounds from predators, just dried, frozen blood as if she had fallen there, exhausted, freezing. She had tried to keep her cub warm until the last moment. A heavy silence took over the environment. The wind was blowing gently, swaying the tree branches. Mickey felt a wave of sadness invade him. He wasn't someone who got carried away by emotions easily. But that scene was devastating. And then, a small sound behind him made him turn around. The puppy was there. Mickey didn't know how, but he had woken up and followed him there. He was so small that his paws barely made any noise on the snow. But now, standing just a few feet from his mother's body, he didn't move. His big eyes blinked slowly, observing the scene in front of him. For a few seconds, he just stood there as if he didn't know what to do. And then he approached, slowly, without rushing, without hesitation. Mickey watched in silence as the cub walked over to the adult fox's motionless body, and with a small, tentative movement, touched her nose with his own. Waiting. But nothing happened. The cub tried again, gently pushing its mother's head. Nothing. He took a step back, eyes shining in the dim morning light. Then he crouched down beside her, pressing his small, fragile body against hers, seeking a warmth that no longer existed. Mickey felt a knot in her throat. That scene was brutal, a pure and painful portrayal of what wildlife really was. There were no goodbyes, there was no comfort, there were no second chances. That cub was still too young to fully understand what was happening, but in his little heart, he knew. He was alone. Mickey took a deep breath, trying to find a solution to something that seemed impossible to solve. He knew what he should do. You should move away. Let the puppy take its own path. But his body didn't move. He couldn't. Then, before he even realized what he was doing, he knelt down next to the little being and extended his hand. The cub looked up, looking at him for a moment, and then, without resistance, without fear, he walked over to him and cuddled against his chest. Mickey didn't need anything else to understand. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Mickey's shoes, what would you do? Would you let the puppy go his own way, or would you try to protect him? Comment, strength. If you believe that this little one deserves a new chance, and if this story has already touched you in some way, don't forget to leave a like because this helps this video reach more people. If you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications because what comes next could change everything. The silence between the two was broken only by the wind that cut through the freezing landscape. The puppy remained pressed against Mickey's chest, its small, fragile body warming itself against the man's thick coat. He didn't resist. He didn't try to move away. It was as if in that instant he had decided that it was safe there, that presence, so different from everything he knew, was not a threat. Mickey felt the weight of the decision she had just made. He wasn't a man of bonds, of taking care of what didn't belong in his life. But how could I just leave it there? The cub had lost everything. He was alone in the world, without a mother, without protection, without anyone to guide him in the first steps of life. The look he gave Mickey was not one of fear or distrust, but of surrender. Without thinking much more, he took him in his arms and stood up. The little one didn't resist. He just snuggled closer, putting his nose between the warm fabrics. The cold no longer affected him as much, but tiredness was present in every fiber of his small body. The way back to the cabin was silent, just the rustle of snow under Mickey's boots and the calm breathing of the cub, who seemed for the first time in a long time relaxed. Entering the warmth of the small shelter, Mickey knelt by the fireplace, carefully removing the layers of fabric that wrapped the puppy. He placed it on the ground, waiting for some reaction. Perhaps now, with renewed strength, the little creature would try to escape, show fear, try to return to the forest. But no. The cub remained there, still, just watching. His eyes shone in the flickering light of the flames, reflecting something difficult to explain. Curiosity, perhaps? Or just relief at finally not being alone anymore. Mickey picked up a piece of dried meat and chewed it briefly to soften it. Then he handed it to the puppy. He hesitated, sniffed the food, and with a careful movement took it between his teeth. The first piece was swallowed almost without chewing. The second, a little slower. On the third, Mickey noticed something different. The little cub didn't just eat to survive. He ate because he felt he could. Confidence grew, little by little. That night, as Mickey lay down on the furs on the wooden floor, she felt a slight movement beside her. The cub hesitated for a moment, looked around, sniffed the air, and then, with almost childish caution, curled up at Mickey's feet. Her small body pressed against his boots, seeking warmth. Mickey remained motionless, feeling that moment engraved in her memory. For the first time, he found a new instinct, to trust a human. The following days were a silent test of patience and observation. The puppy, now with a little more energy, began to explore the interior of the cabin. He was still fragile, still recovering from the trauma and the cold, but his instincts were beginning to resurface. He sniffed around every corner, pushed small objects with his nose, tested his slender legs on the wooden floor. Mickey observed everything without interfering. He knew that any sudden movement could break that delicate thread of trust that was beginning to form between the two. But to his surprise, the cub showed no intention of running away. The first time Mickey opened the door to leave, the little one remained at the edge of the hut, watching but without crossing the line. He looked at the snow outside, feeling the cold wind, but he didn't take a single step. It was as if, in that warm, safe space, he had found something he didn't know he needed: a home. Every day, the bond between them grew stronger. The puppy started following Mickey inside the cabin, watching every move he made. If Mickey was chopping wood, he would sit close by, his eyes watching. If Mickey got ready to cook, the little one would come closer, sniffing the smells in the air. And then came the moment that really showed how much things had changed. One silent afternoon, as Mickey polished the blade of her knife by the fireplace, she felt a light weight on her foot. He looked down and saw the cub lying there, his head resting against Mickey's boot. He wasn't just there for the heat. He was there because he trusted. Mickey couldn't help but smile a little. He slowly leaned over and ran his hand over the puppy's head, feeling the soft fur between his fingers. The little one roared softly, almost a sleepy mumble, but he didn't move away. That meant everything. It was an unlikely bond, something that shouldn't have happened. But it happened. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think is going on here? Should this puppy remain with Mickey, or does he still belong in the wild? Comment, trust, if you believe this connection deserves to continue. And if this story has already touched your heart, leave a like, because this helps this video reach more people and spread this message of empathy and survival. And of course, if you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications, because what happens next will change everything. The days had passed quickly, and Mickey could no longer deny that the little fox cub had become part of her routine. Every morning, when he got up to rekindle the fire and prepare his hot tea, the fox was already awake, watching him with those attentive and curious eyes. During the day, she followed him around every corner of the cabin, sometimes lying down next to the fireplace, other times sniffing the corners of the small wooden house, exploring every detail with the care of someone who was still getting used to that new world. But deep down, Mickey knew that that bond couldn't last forever. The little cub was a wild animal, belonging to the forest, the cold, the snow. He couldn't keep him there. Inside a shelter that, however safe and warm it was not his true home. The fox was stronger now. He was no longer shivering from the cold. His steps were firm. His once fragile body now seemed more robust. His gaze, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now carried something different: confidence. But too much confidence could be dangerous. If that little animal got used to human presence, it would never be able to return to the wild. And that was why Mickey made her decision. That morning, as the sun began to illuminate the white landscape outside, he grabbed his thickest coat and opened the cabin door. The cold wind rushed in immediately, and the little fox, who was huddled near the fire, raised his head and blinked drowsily. Mickey took a deep breath, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. He crouched down, reached out, and ran his fingers through the cub's soft fur. "Come on, time to go." The little fox tilted its head to the side, not understanding. In all their time together, Mickey had never taken him outside, at least not beyond the door. The snow was a barrier that the cub seemed hesitant to cross, perhaps still remembering the terrible night he almost froze. But this time, Mickey insisted. He took the little one in his arms, feeling the warmth of his body against his thick coat, and went out into the white expanse. The surrounding forest was silent. Only the sound of the wind whispering between the tree branches broke that almost solemn stillness. Every step Mickey took seemed to weigh more. The puppy didn't struggle. It didn't try to escape. He just observed everything with that curious but fearless look. Maybe, in his little mind, he still believed they were just taking another walk together. Upon reaching a clearing surrounded by tall, snow-covered trees, Mickey stopped. He knelt down and carefully placed the fox on the ground. The cub remained there, looking at him, ears slightly tilted back. He didn't seem to understand what was happening. "This is your place. You belong here," Mickey said, her voice firm but low. The fox blinked. He sniffed the ground, feeling the texture of the snow, and then lifted his head back to Mickey. The man waited. He knew that at this point the little one should simply turn and run, follow his instinct, disappear into the trees, find his way. But that's not what happened. The fox remained there. Mickey took a step back. Nothing. He whistled softly, trying to encourage the little one to follow. But the cub only took a tentative step forward, towards him. "No," Mickey murmured, feeling something tighten in her throat. "You need to go." The cub tilted its head, as if trying to understand what he was saying. The snow beneath his thin paws made a soft crunch as he took another step, and another, but again in the wrong direction. Mickey sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. He knew that if he stayed there, the little fox would never leave. He needed to get away. Then, with all the weight that decision carried, he turned his back and started walking back to the cabin. The first step was difficult. The second, even worse. Every time he walked away, he felt like he was leaving something behind. But it was the right thing to do. When he was at a safe distance, he finally looked back. The puppy was there, standing in exactly the same place. Her small body was shaking, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. His eyes, so full of confidence and hope the last few days, were now confused. He watched Mickey with the same intensity as always, but this time there was something different. He understood. Little by little, the fox raised its nose and sniffed the air, as if looking for something. The wind was blowing hard, ruffling his white fur, and then, hesitantly, he took a small step back. Mickey held her breath. And then, finally, the little cub turned and started walking into the forest. He was free. But did he want to be? "Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this was the right decision? Should the little one stay or go?" Comment strength if he believes he still needs Mickey. And if this story has already touched you, leave a like so that more people can learn about this exciting journey. If you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Activate the bell, because what will happen after this, no one could predict. Winter was slowly advancing, covering everything with its relentless presence. The ice on the trees glistened in the pale sun, and the wind whistled through the cracks of Mickey's hut. The days became a monotonous repetition of survival, chopping wood, hunting small prey, keeping the fire going and resisting the cold that seemed to want to devour everything around it. But something inside him had changed. Since the day he took the little fox back to the forest, a strange emptiness had settled into his routine. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that he did the right thing, that the cub belonged to nature, and that his interference should not have gone beyond that first rescue. But no matter how much he tried to push the memory away, it always came back. There were nights when, as he lay on the furs by the fire, he missed the small body curled up at his feet. Sometimes, when chopping wood outside, he would find himself looking at the trail that led to the forest, hoping to see that pair of curious eyes watching him from afar. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. The silence in the forest was absolute. Until, one night, everything changed. Mickey was sitting by the fire, sharpening a knife while listening to the wind outside. He had already gotten used to solitude again. But then, in the middle of the piercing silence, a sound made his entire body freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but his heart recognized it instantly. A small rustle in the snow, a tentative movement near the cabin door. He dropped the knife slowly, every muscle in his body tensing. Whatever was out there wasn't a large predator, nor was it a prowling wolf. It was something lighter, more subtle, something familiar. Mickey got up, crossed the cabin, and opened the door cautiously. The cold wind came in immediately, bringing with it the smell of the forest and the ice of the night. His eyes took a second to adjust to the darkness, but then he saw it. Standing just a few feet from the cabin, on the white snow illuminated by the pale glow of the moon, was he. The little fox had returned. Mickey felt her heart speed up. The cub wasn't so little anymore. His body was bigger, stronger. His fur, once thin and fragile, was now thick and shiny, protecting him from the cold. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. They still carried the same intensity, the same connection. For a moment, the two stood there just watching each other. The wind blew between them, but nothing else seemed to exist other than that unexpected reunion. And then, Mickey noticed something that made her chest tighten. The fox was not alone. Beside him, almost hidden behind his paws, another small being was shivering against the cold. An even smaller puppy, with wide, frightened eyes peering at Mickey suspiciously. He held his breath. It was another puppy. But where did it come from? Mickey looked at the larger fox and noticed something new. His posture was different. He wasn't just there out of instinct or curiosity. He was there for a purpose. He had brought the little one to Mickey. Mickey felt a wave of emotion cross her chest. He found his way. He survived. But he never forgot who helped him. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to this fox all this time? Did he just come back to visit, or is there something more behind it? Comment, reunion, if you believe that this bond will never be broken. And if this story has already touched you, leave a like so that more people can follow this unforgettable moment. If you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Turn on notifications, because what comes next will surprise everyone. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without leaving a like. This helps a lot so that more people know incredible stories like this. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Mickey's place, what would you have done? Comment reunion here below, because this connection between human and animal proves that some bonds never break. And if you've made it this far, it means you love heartwarming animal stories and unexpected connections. So don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell to follow the next rescues and reunions that will move you. And since you've made it to the end, I'm sure you'll love the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. Believe me, this next story will surprise you even more and make you feel that the impossible can happen. Click and watch now.